This story was sent to us by a real listener. It happened somewhere in East Asia, maybe in China, Japan, Vietnam, or Korea. They remember it clearly, and after you hear it, you will too. Welcome to Real VNightmare, where real people share the moments they'll never forget. This story was submitted to our channel by the man named Michael Zhang, who experienced it. Even now, he can still recall the soft clatter of bowls in the kitchen and the dusty scent of the prayer altar in his childhood home. Life in the Zhang household was never quiet, but not for reasons you'd expect. Michael's family had lived in a modest 3-story house in Changning District, Shanghai. It was always full uncles, aunts, cousins. But in particular, one man's presence cast a long shadow over that home, Uncle William. Uncle William was the youngest of 4 siblings. He was gentle, quiet, and well-liked, but he had one weakness. He drank. Not just casually, but habitually, day in and day out. He'd started when he was just 18. And by the time he died at 37 in 1994, cirrhosis had taken him. He didn't touch beer, only strong liquor, and lots of it. His regular drinking spot was a noodle stall owned by a woman named Auntie Feng. Every morning around 9 or 10, Uncle William and his rowdy friends would gather there to drink and play Chinese chess. They'd continue until the sun dipped behind the rooftops. Michael remembered one evening when it was already 7 p.m., and Uncle William still hadn't returned home. That was rare. Usually by 4 or 5 p.m., he'd stumble back on his own. His mother, whom everyone respected deeply, became worried. Auntie Feng came knocking and told her, "He's passed out drunk in front of my shop again. Please come get him." Michael's father had migrated to Australia back in 1977. So everything at home fell on his mother's shoulders. That night she grabbed a leather switch and marched over to the noodle stall. When she returned, Uncle William was staggering behind her, reeking of alcohol. Without hesitation, she beat him hard. Chairs clattered, and everyone else just watched in silence. Even Michael and his older siblings huddled in the corners, afraid to intervene. But despite all the scoldings and the whippings, Uncle William's drinking never stopped. Sometimes he would sneak out, and Michael's mother would lock the doors to keep him in. Trapped inside, he'd shout and pound the walls in fury, desperate for a drink. His mother warned all the children, "No one opens the door for him." Understand, and none of them dared to defy her. The neighbors knew her well, not just because she ruled the house with authority, but because she managed to keep everything together even in chaos. Then came the day in 1994. Uncle William rose in the morning to fetch food, but just as he stepped outside, he collapsed. His face hit the pavement, and the family rushed him to the hospital. But he died on the way. They held a traditional funeral, and though his wife Bonnie, whom the family never really approved of, showed up to pay respects on, the first day she disappeared afterward. No one could find her. She had always been distant in the marriage, rarely coming home outside of weekends. The funeral procession took his body to the ancestral cemetery of the Fujianese Association in Sun, Guangda Anhui Province. After he was buried, the family returned home, and things seemed normal. No one saw or heard anything unusual for nearly a full year. But then in the spring of 1995, Michael's mother was hanging laundry on the rooftop terrace when something strange happened. As she walked past the stairwell, a familiar scent hit her, sharp and unmistakable. Cigarette smoke. Uncle William had been a heavy smoker, and no one else in the house smoked. The smell stopped her in her tracks. She slowly looked up toward Uncle William's locked bedroom on the 2nd floor. The shutters were closed, but near the top of the door there was a small ventilation fan. And from that fan, a thin white stream of cigarette smoke spiraled into the open air. She didn't panic. She was used to ghostly pranks by then. Instead, she dropped her laundry basket, looked toward the door, and called out sternly, "Enough of that. Don't scare the children." The smoke vanished. She thought that would be the end of it. But the next evening, Michael came home from school and found his mother standing in front of Uncle William's altar, muttering quietly. He couldn't remember exactly what she was saying. It had been so long ago, but her face was solemn, not frightened. And then the sightings began to spread. One of Michael's older sisters, Sarah, had an unsettling encounter one night while cramming for her college entrance exams. It was nearly 10 p.m. The whole house was asleep and Sarah hunched over her desk. Suddenly felt a sharp cramp in her stomach. She rushed to the bathroom, which was located downstairs. But after finishing, she realized she'd forgotten to bring tissue paper. Everyone was asleep, and she didn't want to wake their mother, who was known to scold for minor mishaps. So she decided to risk it, unlock the door, sprint across to the hallway cupboard, grab the paper, and dash back. As she reached for the door latch, she paused. Outside, just beyond the door, she heard it. A deep, raspy cough. Startled, she called out, "Mom!" But there was no reply, only more coughing. And it wasn't a woman's cough. It was definitely a man's. Still, for some reason, she assumed it was her mother. Maybe because it felt safer to believe that. Sarah cracked the door open just slightly to peek. That's when she saw it. A black silhouette drifting silently past the hallway. She froze. Suddenly, the toilet paper she needed dropped from the cabinet, unrolling as it landed on the floor beside her, as if someone had handed it to her. She snatched it and bolted upstairs. The next morning, she asked their mother if she had been there. "No," she said. "That wasn't me. That was Uncle William. He helped you out last night." From that moment on, Uncle William's presence no longer felt like a vague memory. It became part of the household atmosphere. Not a day passed without someone feeling that eerie chill on the back of their neck, catching a whiff of cigarette smoke in a closed room, or sensing the presence of someone unseen standing nearby. Michael never saw his uncle directly, but he often heard stories from his older siblings. His mother insisted that Uncle William never meant to frighten anyone except for the maids. Every helper hired after his death encountered something unsettling. It began subtly. A plate shifting on its own, a door creaking shut when no wind was present. But then things escalated. Their first long-term maid after the funeral was a woman named Nancy. She was in her 40s, slow-moving and not particularly detail-oriented. She had a habit of oversleeping, sometimes not getting out of bed until 9 or 10 in the morning. The family tolerated her mostly because it was hard to find household help at the time. But soon the children began complaining. She didn't clean properly, left clothes piled up, and frequently forgot to cook meals on time. Michael's mother had words with her, stern but fair. Nancy promised to improve, and for a few days she did. But just as quickly, she slipped back into her lazy habits. No one thought much of it until one morning she packed up without notice and left. No explanation, no goodbye. She didn't even collect her last week's wages. That sudden departure puzzled everyone. But what came next offered some clarity. A second maid arrived, introduced by a family friend. Her name was Grace. Unlike Nancy, Grace was louder and more opinionated, with a sharp tongue and short temper. She treated the job with mild disdain, cleaning in a rushed, careless manner, mumbling to herself as she swept. Grace's responsibility included cleaning the second-floor rooms once a month, including the locked one that used to belong to Uncle William. The door was still shut tight, but Michael's mother would hand Grace the key and remind her, "Don't touch anything. Just dust and sweep." On one particular evening, as Grace stepped into the musty room, she began her routine grumbling. She scoffed at the old wooden furniture, complained about how stuffy it was, and sneered. Why doesn't the man who lived here clean up his own mess? She had no idea. The family had deliberately never told any of the maids about the room's former occupant. They feared it would scare them away. But that night, Grace would find out herself. As she muttered, something creaked behind her. It was the wooden wardrobe. The door slowly opened with a drawn-out, high-pitched squeal. Grace spun around. At first, she thought it might have been a draft. But then she noticed its cigarette smoke, thick and white, curling upward from the open wardrobe. A second later, the other door creaked open too. Now both wardrobe doors were wide, revealing darkness inside. Grace froze. Then from the shadows, something moved. She saw him. Uncle William, or what remained of him. Thin as bones, with sunken cheeks and dark, lifeless eyes. His skin had taken on a bluish hue, and when he smiled, if you could call that a smile, his yellowed teeth showed through cracked lips. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came out, only the sound of that same raspy cough. Grace screamed. She tried to run, but her legs buckled. She hit the floor hard and scrambled backward like a crab, knocking over a stool in the process. Her eyes remained fixed on the ghastly figure in the wardrobe. But just as suddenly as he appeared, he was gone. In the days that followed, Grace said nothing. She continued her work, silent and mechanical. But by the end of the week, she too quit without warning, just like Nancy. Michael's mother eventually learned the full story. Grace told it to her privately, trembling as she spoke. She swore she had never believed in ghosts until then. But the face she saw in that wardrobe haunted her dreams. She couldn't sleep in the house after that. And even her family told her she'd begun sleep-talking in fright. What puzzled the family was that Uncle William had never scared them, only the hired help. And only the lazy or disrespectful ones. It was as if he was protecting the home in his own odd way. The third maid, Sue, arrived several months later. She was older and even more careless than Grace. She left food uncovered, broke cups, and spilled soup without cleaning it. Yet Uncle William didn't seem to react the same way. Sure, there were still signs of his presence, coughs from empty rooms. The sharp smell of cigarette smoke wafting through closed windows, flickering lights. But Sue was never directly frightened. At most, she complained of being jolted awake every morning at 5 a.m. Like someone's pulling my blanket off, she said. Michael's mother quietly took that as a sign Uncle William had resorted to gentler nudges. Maybe he was tired. Or maybe he had accepted Sue's presence as harmless, even if she was a bit clumsy. Still, the rest of the family noticed one pattern. Uncle William never showed himself unless provoked, unless someone insulted the house or disrespected his memory. And after Sue left, no maid stayed longer than a few months. They all felt. They watched. Michael, as the youngest child, had a different kind of fear. He remembered walking past Uncle William's room at night, the heavy stillness of that corridor making his skin crawl. Though he'd never seen the ghost, the image described by Grace stayed lodged in his imagination. The bony hands, the blackened gums, the silent laugh. That's seriously creepy. Over time, the fear faded into routine. Uncle William became less of a ghost story and more of a household legend. His presence, though unsettling, was no longer unexpected. But still, every now and then, he made sure the living remembered. It was around the year 2000 when Michael's family faced a big decision. They had to move. Their old house in Lujiazui had become too small, and maintenance was proving difficult. After weeks of searching, they found a 3-story building in Minhang District, an older structure from the late 80s. Though the home was dated, Michael's mother saw potential. She wanted to tear it down and rebuild, make it modern, brighter, open. She called up a family friend, a construction engineer named Thomas, to manage the project. They sat together, sketched blueprints, argued over flooring and ceiling height. Before work began, Michael's mother followed tradition. Being from a Fujianese Chinese background, she was careful with rituals. She performed a large offering ceremony, lighting incense, burning paper money, and asking permission from the land spirits. Construction progressed smoothly. No accidents. No delays. The workers even joked that it was the luckiest project they'd been on. In the final week, just before the final paint and finish, a few of the workers began to sleep on site. The weather was hot, and the second-floor balcony offered a nice evening breeze. Among them was Thomas and 4 workers, including a young man named Tony. Tony was only 21 at the time, tall, wiry, and known for having a weak stomach. He was the kind of guy who drank 2 beers and immediately needed the bathroom. That night, after sharing a small feast of grilled pork and rice wine on the upper balcony, everyone fell asleep on thin mats spread across the wooden floor around 2 a.m. Tony stirred awake. He had to pee. Groggy and dizzy from the drinks, he tiptoed through the dark corridor toward the bathroom. The hallway didn't have working lights yet. Shadows stretched long across the wooden planks. As he walked, his own footsteps echoed faintly behind him, soft but deliberate. Halfway to the door, Tony froze. At the bottom of the staircase, near the curve, where the steps bent out of view, a figure stood. It faced away from him. He could clearly see the shape of a person tall about 8 meters and completely still. The silhouette was sharply outlined by the faint light from the street lamp outside. Tony blinked, then squinted harder. He thought, that must be Thomas. The body shape was similar. Maybe Thomas had come up to check on something. So Tony called out, "Hey, why aren't you asleep? What are you doing down there?" No reply. The figure didn't move, didn't twitch, didn't even breathe. Tony tried again, louder this time. Still nothing. Unease crept up his spine. His skin began to prickle. He took a cautious step down the stairs, leaning over the banister to get a better look. And that's when he saw it. The figure's body from the neck down looked normal. But the face... There was no face. Just smooth, pale skin stretched over the head like wax. No eyes, no nose, no mouth. Tony's breath caught. His foot slipped, and he tumbled down the stairs. The thud echoed through the house. Instantly, the other 3 workers shot awake and came running. Tony was lying crumpled at the base of the steps, trembling wide-eyed, unable to speak. They carried him back upstairs, placed a cold cloth on his forehead. But he kept mumbling the same thing. It had no face. No face. The next morning, Tony couldn't get out of bed. Fever raged through his body. The workers rushed him to a nearby health clinic, which thankfully was only a few blocks away. The doctor couldn't explain the illness. There were no infections, no underlying causes. Just high temperature and acute fear. Michael's mother covered the clinic bills, suspecting something was wrong with the house. Still, she kept quiet. She didn't want to panic anyone, especially not the workers who were finishing her dream home. But it wasn't over. 2 nights later, around the same time, the haunting returned. This time it wasn't Tony. It was Daniel. Daniel was older, well-built, and boisterous. He had a tough exterior and often made fun of ghost stories. But that night, as he lay dozing near the balcony with the others, something stirred him. He heard a scratching noise, then a metal clatter, then a voice. Faint at first, then louder. "Jump down, come on, jump with me!" It sounded like someone was inviting him to leap from the balcony. Daniel sat up, blinking in confusion. The balcony door was wide open. Wind pushed gently through the curtain. He got up and walked toward the edge. "Jump down. Let's climb together. It's fun." The voice again. He reached the railing and placed one foot on it. Thankfully, one of the other workers happened to wake up to go to the bathroom. As he walked past, he saw Daniel balancing on the edge, his eyes glassy, his face pale. "Hey, what the hell are you doing?" Daniel didn't answer. The worker ran over, smacked him hard across the back, and pulled him down. Only then did Daniel snap out of it. He collapsed onto the floor, panting, tears running down his face. The faceless figure hadn't just returned, it was now whispering. The following morning, no one made jokes. No one blamed alcohol or fatigue. The men sat around their breakfast bowls in silence, pushing food around without eating. It was clear something beyond explanation was at work in the house. Thomas the engineer decided enough was enough. That afternoon, he visited Michael's mother and shared everything the shadow at the stairs. Tony's fall, Daniel's near jump. He didn't sugarcoat it. He told her the men were spooked and might refuse to finish the project. Michael's mother didn't argue. She simply nodded, eyes steady. Then she picked up the phone. She called someone she trusted, Madame Zhu, a respected spirit medium and Taoist practitioner who lived in Baoshan near the Baoshan Bridge. They had known each other for years. Whenever strange disturbances arose, Madame Zhu was the one people turned to. Later that evening, Madame Zhu arrived with incense candles, a stack of joss paper, and a small clay censer. Her white robes fluttered slightly as she stepped into the unfinished living room. The workers had already cleared the space. Thomas greeted her with a respectful bow. Madame Zhu walked slowly, pausing at each stair and corner, her eyes half closed, sensing the air. When she reached the second-floor landing, the very spot Tony had seen the faceless ghost, she stopped. "This is where it lingers," she said softly. She lit incense and held it steady. The smoke curled upward, then abruptly shifted direction, blown by no wind. Her brow furrowed. She whispered an invocation, then asked to be alone with the house. Half an hour later, she came downstairs and sat with Michael's mother. "This house carries a restless spirit," she began. "It's not attached to your family, but to the land." She closed her eyes and continued. "Many years ago, a man lived here. He was often drunk, often violent. One night, he returned home late, locked out by his wife. In a drunken rage, he tried to climb over the iron gate. He slipped, fell, and broke his neck. Died instantly." Michael's mother listened silently, her fingers pressed together. Madame Zhu went on. "The wife, out of shame or fear, didn't perform proper funeral rites. She buried him quickly without announcing the death. Then she left, so the house disappeared. No one came to pay respects. No one offered incense. His spirit was never guided home. It became trapped here, twisted and faceless. Michael had been sitting nearby, just within earshot. The term faceless made his stomach knot. Madame Zhu opened her pouch and drew out a small scroll of yellow talisman paper. "You'll need a Zhenya ceremony," she said. Zhenya, a ritual or method used to spiritually suppress or seal off harmful forces, believed to prevent them from spreading or returning. She explained the steps carefully. An offering table was to be placed exactly where the man had died at the front gate, next to the threshold, on the 2nd and 16th of each lunar month, as well as the Ghost Festival. On the 15th of the 7th lunar month, the family was to light candles, burn joss paper, and offer food. This act of remembrance, even to an unrelated spirit, would prevent future unrest. Michael's mother agreed without hesitation. The ceremony was held the next evening. The table was simple: 2 bowls of rice, roasted pork, sweet tea, and bundles of paper money. Candles flickered beside sticks of incense planted in a brass urn. Madame Zhu chanted ancient verses in a low, melodic voice, Occasionally, she struck a tiny gong. The workers stood silently nearby. Thomas watched with quiet reverence. When the incense burned down, Madame Zhu sprinkled water infused with talisman ash around the doorway, then sealed the final step with red thread tied to the iron gate. When she finished, she bowed and said, "He won't return, not in the same way." And she was right. From that night on, no one saw the faceless figure again. No more whispers. No more cold drafts in the stairwell. The workers completed their tasks without further incident, and Michael's family moved into the home soon after. For a long time, everything was peaceful. But even peace in this world is never permanent. The next haunting would come not from the land, but from within their own community. Back in their old neighborhood in Temple Alley Ward 14, lived a woman named Madame Huang. She was part of the old Fujianese enclave, a tight-knit, traditional circle of families who had migrated from China decades ago. Madame Huang had one son, David Zhang, and two grandsons, Kevin and Alex. Her husband had passed away years earlier, and as she grew older, she became frail. By the time Michael was around 8 years old, she barely left her home. Then, in late 1994, news spread through the neighborhood Madame Huang had died suddenly. Likely from a stroke, David was devastated. He arranged a proper funeral held over 3 days and had her buried in the same cemetery as Uncle William in the hills outside Guangde. The rituals followed tradition incense prayers, food offerings. Family members attended in formal attire. The grandsons lit incense under supervision. It all seemed proper. But 3 days after the funeral, David's family began to experience strange events. Kevin claimed to have seen his grandmother walking in the hallway. Alex, while getting ready for bed, heard someone whisper his name and turned to see her standing in the corner, smiling silently. At first, they didn't tell anyone. It was grief, they reasoned. Hallucinations. Echoes of loss. But then Madame Huang began appearing every night, sometimes in dreams, sometimes at the foot of the bed, always staring. Eventually, David confessed the truth to Michael's mother. His mother's spirit, he believed, had returned. Why would she be so restless? Michael's mother asked. David hesitated, then admitted he had not buried her beside her husband. The family plot had been full. He chose a different burial site, far from her husband's grave. "I didn't think it mattered," he said. "But to the dead as to the living, distance matters." The unrest escalated. Madame Huang's spirit began to make herself known, not just through apparitions, but through movement sound presence. David's family, already rattled, grew deeply afraid. Every night, the lights stayed on. No one dared sleep in complete darkness. The sons stopped using the hallway bathroom alone. The atmosphere in the house turned heavy, like invisible hands were pressing down on their shoulders. Michael, still young at the time, visited the Zhang family house frequently. He was friends with Kevin, David's younger son, and often came by on weekends to play. But after Madame Huang's passing, the household changed. Doors remained slightly ajar. Incense burned at odd hours. Conversations were hushed. One weekend, Michael and his older cousin Sarah were allowed to stay the night. They had heard whispers that Madame Huang was still around, and curiosity overcame fear. That night at exactly 9 p.m., David made his way around the small alley neighborhood, stopping by each house to ask for help. "Tonight we perform the return path," he said respectfully. According to Fujianese tradition, during the mourning period, especially within the first 49 days, families perform a ritual called the Path of Light. Each household in the neighborhood was asked to place a pair of candles outside their doors, spaced evenly along the road. The idea was to create a lit path leading from the main alley entrance all the way to David's home. It would help the wandering spirit of the deceased find her way home one last time. The neighbors agreed. By 9:30, every house had shut its doors. Even the pets were kept inside. No one was allowed to walk the path once the candles were lit. No one. Michael, young and naive, didn't fully understand the gravity of it. He convinced Sarah, who was about 15 at the time, to keep watch with him. They sat just inside the steel gate of his house, peering through the narrow, vertical bars out toward the flickering path. Outside the alley was pitch black. The only light came from the dim orange glow of the candle flames, stretching like stars in a constellation down the narrow path. The stillness was unnatural. No footsteps, no barking dogs, no voices. It was as if the entire street had taken a breath and refused to exhale. They waited, and so soon. Nothing. 10:30. Still nothing. Michael yawned, laying his head on Sarah's lap, nearly dozing off. Just before 11:30, the air shifted, wind. A strong gust blew through the alley, flapping laundry that had been forgotten on clotheslines. Shirts and towels whipped in the air, some tumbling to the ground. The candles flickered wildly, some nearly going out. Sarah grabbed Michael by the arms and hoisted him up. Inside, now. As they turned to retreat into the house, the wind stopped. Suddenly. No fade-out, no tapering. Just silence. Michael blinked in confusion. "What was that? Did she come?" Sarah didn't answer. They stepped into the foyer, reached for the inner door, and that's when they heard it. Shh. Shh. The unmistakable sound of someone walking slowly in slippers. Shh. Shh. Dragging across the concrete just outside the gate. They froze. No one was supposed to be outside. Everyone knew the rules. No one was allowed to break the path once it was lit. Sarah whispered, "Do you hear that?" Michael nodded, too scared to speak. They tiptoed back toward the steel gate and pressed their faces gently against the bars. Peeking out, nothing. The flickering candles, the fluttering shadows, but no figure. Then the shuffling steps grew louder, closer. Sarah reached for the latch, her hand trembling. She was about to open it to peek around the corner when a voice called out from behind. Their mother. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "Don't look." She grabbed them both by the arms and yanked them away from the door, scolding them with a whisper. "If she sees you, she might take you with her." Michael blinked. "But it's just—" "No," she interrupted. "Never look. You never know who or what is walking that path." The three of them huddled inside, hearts pounding. The next morning, Sarah confessed to Michael that in that brief moment before their mother pulled her away, she saw a shadow gliding down the candlelit path. No feet. Just a pale figure floating slowly toward the gate. And though she didn't see the face, she somehow knew it was Madame Huang. Days later, David visited Madame Zhu. He was desperate. "We did the ceremony," he said. "We lit the path, we gave offerings. But she's still here. She still whispers to the boys." Madame Zhu asked questions about the funeral, the burial, the grave. That's when David admitted it. His mother's final wish had been to be buried beside her husband. But the plot was already occupied. David, under pressure and short on time, had chosen a different cemetery far across the province, near the edge of a forested area. He hadn't considered how far it was from her husband's grave. Madame Zhu nodded solemnly. "Then that is your answer," she said. "She's angry. Not because she died, not because of you, but because she died alone. And you buried her far from the one person who meant everything to her." David wiped his face with a trembling hand. "What do I do? Move her," Madame Zhu said. "Pay for a new grave, one next to her husband's. and perform the reburial yourself. So he did. It cost him nearly double what the original funeral had, but he made the arrangements. He hired a monk to lead the ceremony. He asked his sons to kneel before her casket. He knelt himself. And when the reburial was complete, a gentle breeze passed over the cemetery. That night, for the first time in weeks, no one in David's house heard footsteps. No one heard whispers. No one saw Madame Huang. She had gone home. For a while, the Zhang family lived in peace. The home in Minhang district remained serene. No more restless spirits walked the stairwells. No more whispers called from behind closed doors. Life flowed gently. But as Michael would come to learn, calm never lasts forever. The year was 2001. Michael was 16. It was the summer before his final high school exams. His family, riding on better fortune and a successful business, decided to take a long-awaited vacation abroad. It would be their first major trip in years, a full family holiday to Thailand. 17 of them went. Michael, his older sisters, his only brother, 7 nieces and nephews, and several cousins. Only his mother stayed behind, too superstitious to travel, while offerings were due at home. The first few days went well. The family laughed, took group photos in front of temples and beaches, bought trinkets from night markets, and shared meals in bustling food courts. They arrived in Pattaya by the 3rd night. Their hotel looked beautiful from the outside, newly renovated modern signage, gleaming marble floors in the lobby. But the inside told a different story. Michael noticed it the moment he stepped into the elevator. Everything from the walls to the stair railings was made of dark, polished wood. Even the light fixtures glowed a pale yellow, creating a murky, dim atmosphere. There was an uneasy stillness to the air, like something was waiting behind the paneling. And most unsettling of all, every hallway wall was lined with oil paintings. Not cheerful landscapes or calming still lifes. No. These were portraits, classic Western faces, Victorian-era women with hollow eyes, generals with grim scowls, children whose painted smiles felt too wide. Michael, sensitive to the invisible world, felt his stomach turn. Their rooms were assigned on the 3rd floor, rooms 307, 309, and 311. 6 people per room. As they exited the elevator, Michael noticed something strange. Just to the left of the elevator door was a small shrine tucked discreetly against the wall. No offerings, no fruit, just a single red bottle unlabeled resting before a plain ceramic figure. It looked neglected, forgotten. Michael said nothing, but his instincts screamed. That night, after everyone settled in, Michael realized he'd left his wallet upstairs. The group had gathered in the lobby, waiting for the tour van to arrive. Not wanting to cause a delay, Michael quietly excused himself and rushed back to the 3rd floor alone. That decision would haunt him. He stepped off the elevator and turned toward room 307. But something was wrong. The hallway stretched longer than he remembered. He walked straight, counting doors, 303, 305, 309, 311, then back to 301, 303 again. No room 307. He turned around, walked the other way. Same sequence. 307 was gone. He paced back and forth, heart racing. He knew the room was there earlier. He had slept in it. Unpacked his suitcase there. But now it was as if the door had vanished, or worse, was being hidden. Confused and frightened, he walked toward the far end of the hallway where a large window overlooked the hotel courtyard. He placed his hand on the glass, trying to calm himself, breathing slow. That's when he heard it. Whispers. Dozens of voices, soft and quick, xisao, xisao. Xisao-like. Someone flipping through radio stations just a little too fast. The voices weren't speaking Mandarin, or Thai, or any language Michael recognized. They didn't sound angry, just deliberate, like they were talking about him. Michael spun around. No one, just the hallway dimly lit, lined with paintings. The portraits stared at him, some with smirks, some with sadness. He backed up, reaching for his phone. As he dialed his older brother, the painting nearest to him tilted, not fell, not wobbled. Tilted. Then came the sound bup, the distinct thud of canvas hitting the floor. A painting had dropped face down on the wood. Michael jumped. Heart pounding, he ran toward it. Something inside him screamed to set it upright. Maybe out of guilt, maybe to avoid blame if it was damaged. As he bent down, another painting caught his eye. It was a portrait of a Western woman in Renaissance clothing, delicate lace golden curls, holding a small glass goblet. Michael's eyes lingered on the goblet. The liquid inside was dark red, too red, like fresh blood. Then the woman moved. Not quickly, slowly. Her head turned. Bit by bit, her painted gaze shifted until it stared directly at Michael. Half of her face was blackened, burnt, and cracked as if scorched by fire, and yet she smiled. Michael dropped the frame and staggered back. His body felt paralyzed, his breathing shallow. Tears welled at the corners of his eyes as he collapsed into a squat and began to whisper prayers, calling upon every name he could remember, Buddha's ancestors' deities. Please, please, not here, not again. That's when his brother appeared at the end of the hallway. Michael, what the hell are you doing? His voice broke through the silence. Michael looked up, eyes wild. He pointed at the fallen painting. It moved. It looked at me. His brother sighed. You're freaking out, probably tired. He didn't believe him. Back in the lobby, Michael didn't say much more, but that night he refused to sleep on the bed. He laid a blanket on the wooden floor and tried to calm his mind, but the worst was yet to come. That night, the fourth of the trip, was one Michael would never forget. After a long day touring temples, markets, and riding boats through crowded canals, the family returned to the Pattaya Hotel exhausted by 10:30 p.m. Everyone had washed up, changed into pajamas, and crawled into their respective beds. Michael still refused to sleep on the mattress. He laid out a thin blanket on the wooden floor in the space between the beds and the closet. The room's dim lighting made everything look hazy, sepia-toned. He stared up at the ceiling fan, spinning gently above, trying to lull himself to sleep. He dozed off around midnight. Then came the knock. Knock, knock, knock. 3 sharp raps on the door. Michael's eyes flew open. He wasn't sure if he had dreamed it. He turned his head to look toward the door. His 2 sisters and brother were already awake, sitting upright in their beds, their expressions matching his own. They had all heard it. The room fell silent again. Michael sat up, ears straining. He could hear the hum of the air conditioner, the gentle creak of the fan. Then the laughter started. Not one laugh, but several. Hee hee hee, ha hee hee. The sounds were high-pitched, giddy, childlike, but layered with something wrong. Too sharp, too deliberate, as if someone or something was pretending to laugh and didn't quite know how. The laughter echoed outside the door and down the corridor. Michael's older brother, the toughest of the group, stood up with a scowl. Probably some drunk tourists, he muttered, trying to brush it off. He walked to the door and swung it open. Nothing. The hallway was empty. Paintings lined the walls just as before, their faces frozen in painted smiles and sorrow. He turned back to the others. See no one there? Go back to sleep. He turned off the lights and climbed back into bed. But no one could sleep. A few minutes later, another knock. Knock, knock, knock. Then laughter. Michael sat upright on the floor, frozen. His sisters began whispering prayers. His brother groaned and threw the covers over his head. Still, they tried to sleep again. Maybe the prank would end. But it didn't. The knocks came back a third time, harder, faster. Knock, 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 followed by giggling, now louder, almost mocking. Michael's brother had had enough. He leapt up, grabbed the wooden chair near the vanity table, and yanked the door open again, this time with the chair raised, ready to strike. He stepped out into the hallway and stopped. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there. His body became rigid like a statue. Michael rushed over his sisters close behind. They reached the door and followed his frozen gaze, and gasped. The entire wall across from their room, the one that had held 2 or 3 paintings the day before, was now covered with all the paintings from the corridor. Dozens of portraits, shoulder to shoulder, jammed into the small space, their frames overlapping slightly. Every face stared directly into their room. Every eye painted but somehow glinting seemed to flicker with emotion. Some eyes were crying, others laughing, others grimacing in pain. The expressions shifted slowly, warping, weeping, grinning, screaming as if the canvas was alive and melting under invisible heat. Worst of all was the sound. It came from nowhere and everywhere. A low moaning that rose into high-pitched sobs, then dropped into guttural growls. It circled them, surrounded them, bounced off the wooden floors, and echoed down the corridor. Michael and his siblings stood rooted to the spot. His brother dropped the chair. No one said a word, then slammed the door shut behind them, pushed by an invisible force. The sound startled them into action. Michael grabbed the handle, twisted it, shoved it open. They fled back inside and locked the door. They didn't sleep that night. They sat together on one bed, backs pressed against the wall, lights fully on. It wasn't until morning, when their cousin from the room next door came knocking, that they dared move again. She found them pale, shaking, with dark circles under their eyes. "What happened to you?" she asked. Michael's brother didn't answer. He just stepped aside to let her see. But the wall was empty again. The paintings were back in their original places, spaced evenly across the corridor. That day on the tour bus back to Bangkok, no one spoke. Not even the children. Later at the airport, Michael's brother finally broke the silence. He walked up to their tour guide and told him everything. The guide nodded slowly, not surprised. He leaned in and said, "That hotel, it used to be on cursed ground. Locals say spirits roam the halls, but they don't harm families who follow proper respect." He hesitated, then added, "I didn't say anything earlier because your family seemed strong. I didn't want to scare anyone." Michael's mother, upon hearing the full story later, was furious. Not at the guide, but at the spirits. She immediately called Madame Zhu. The very next day, she visited the master's home and collected talismans, blessed charms etched with protective symbols folded into triangles and squares. She placed one in each child's wallet. Some she tied into bracelets, others she slipped into bags and pillowcases. She warned her children, never again leave home without this. And from that day forward, Michael always carried one with him. The faceless woman, the weeping paintings, the knocking laughter, they never came back, but their memory lingered. Yeah, something's definitely wrong now. After returning from Thailand, life in the Zhang family began to realign with a quieter rhythm. The business resumed. The children returned to school. And Michael, though visibly shaken by the haunting at the hotel, buried himself in study. But deep inside, something had shifted. The last story Michael shared in his submission was the most personal, and perhaps the most terrifying of all. Because this time, it wasn't about someone else's spirit or a haunted place. It was about him. This story unfolded at the end of his final year of high school, late 2002. He was preparing for the national graduation exams, and like most students, was enrolled in evening tutoring sessions. The pressure was immense, but Michael felt ready, determined. At first, his mother would accompany him to the evening classes, picking him up at 9 p.m. But as weeks passed, and Michael gained confidence, he insisted on going alone. "I'm not a kid anymore," he had said. His mother, reluctant but trusting, allowed it. She even bought him a scooter metallic green, repainted to look newer. Michael loved that scooter. It was freedom. He rode it proudly through the quiet streets of Minhang, weaving past street vendors and neon-lit shop signs. For about a month, everything was fine. Routine. Until the night of the incident. It was a Tuesday. The class had ended a little late, closer to 9:30 p.m. Michael hurried down the stairs, clutching his backpack, eager to get home. He walked to the parking lot, found his scooter, and kick-started the engine. What he didn't notice was the feeling, the pressure in the air, the silence of the trees. He pulled out into the main road, heading toward home. At first, everything felt normal. Then, about halfway there, as he approached an intersection, something came over him. His hand twisted the throttle. Hard. The scooter jolted forward, picking up speed. Fast. Michael blinked, confused. He hadn't meant to do that. His body began to tremble. His hands felt disconnected from his brain, as if someone else was steering. He tried to let go, ease the throttle, but his fingers wouldn't respond. His mind screamed, "Stop. Slow down." But another voice whispered, "Go faster, faster." The road ahead curved slightly toward a bridge. There was a small alley on the right, his usual turnoff. He had to slow down, but he couldn't. Panic surged. He jammed the brakes. The scooter shuddered but didn't stop. Instead, it surged again, lurching toward the curve. And just then, from the opposite direction, came another vehicle. A man on a motorcycle, drunk. Speeding. Michael saw the headlights, heard the roar of the engine. They were on a collision course. In that instant, time slowed. His vision narrowed. And then a jolt. Not a crash, not an impact, but something interfered. It was as if an invisible hand reached into the path of the scooter and yanked it. Sideways, guiding it just out of harm's way. The motorcycle zoomed past him, missing him by inches. Michael's scooter wobbled, tires screeching before coming to a jerking stop against the curb. He sat frozen, heart pounding, palms drenched in sweat. He could have died. He should have died. But somehow something had pulled him away. Later that night, when he returned home trembling, his mother scolded him for coming back late. But one look at his face silenced her. He told her everything. She didn't speak at first. Then she said, "We need to go see Madame Zhu, now." The next morning, they traveled together to the house of the spirit medium. Michael explained what happened. Madame Zhu listened, eyes closed, fingers brushing a string of sandalwood beads. When he finished, she opened her eyes. "It's not just bad luck," she said. Then she asked for his birth details, date, time, place. She scribbled characters on yellow paper, dipped a brush into red ink, and began calculating. Finally, she looked at him and said, "You were born at 3:33 a.m. Every number in your birth time is a double 333. You were born during the hour of shadows, a time when the gates between worlds are thin." Michael felt his throat tighten. "You were born with a tether," she continued. "A link between the visible world and the hidden one. Some would call it a gift. I call it a curse." She handed him a cup of water mixed with ash from a burnt talisman. "Drink this," she said. "It will dull the edge." Michael did as told. But he felt nothing. "Why would something try to hurt me?" he asked. "It's not always malice," Madame Zhu replied. "Sometimes spirits look for balance. When too much light gathers in one place, something dark must follow. You were marked the moment you were born. Michael looked down at his hands. So what do I do? Protect yourself. Don't tempt fate, and never ride that road alone again. That evening, he returned home quietly. He never touched that scooter again. And though he never saw the entity that tried to pull him into death, he felt its grip. A cold, unseen force steering his body like a puppet. He had encountered ghosts before. But this was different. This one wanted his soul. Life carried on after that night, but nothing ever felt quite the same. Michael stopped riding altogether. He walked or took taxis. Even in daylight, that old sense of being watched clung to him. His mother quietly placed talismans around his bed, under his pillow, behind mirrors. A brass bell was tied to his backpack, small enough not to draw attention, loud enough to ward off things unseen. Still, the nightmares persisted. It always began the same way he would find himself back on the scooter, speeding toward the bend, unable to slow down. But in the dream, there was no drunk rider, no curve, no street. Just a shadow at the end of the road, a woman in white, floating, not walking, face hidden by long black hair, her arms outstretched, waiting. Each time the dream reached the moment of impact, Michael would jolt awake, drenched in sweat. The dreams continued for 49 nights. His mother counted them. On the 50th morning, she burned another talisman and declared the spirit had passed. But Michael wasn't so sure. Not long after, Michael was invited by a classmate named Eric Wang to study at his home. Eric's family lived in a townhouse near the river in Songjiang district, old-style construction. Narrow staircases, sloping wooden beams. The air always smelled faintly of damp earth and burning oil from the kitchen below. Michael arrived one evening to find Eric waiting outside with a grin. "Come on up," he said. The two settled into the second-floor study room, books and notes spread across the low table. They worked for hours, occasionally breaking into laughter over shared exam miseried around 10:30 p.m. Memsur, Eric's mother, called from downstairs, telling them to finish up. Eric left the room to grab something. Michael remained. That's when he heard the footsteps, coming from the hallway just outside the room. He assumed it was Eric returning. But when he turned, no one was there. He stepped into the hallway and saw a woman standing at the top of the staircase, dressed in white, not his imagination. Not sleep deprivation, real. Her back was turned. Her long hair flowed straight down to her waist. She stood completely still. Michael froze. His breath hitched. Then slowly the woman turned her head only slightly, just enough to reveal her cheek. It was blistered, blackened, burned, exactly like the woman in the painting back in the hotel. Michael staggered backward. Just then, Eric returned holding a stack of notebooks. "Hey, what are you?" But before he could finish, Michael grabbed him by the sleeve and pointed. "Who's that?" he whispered. Eric looked confused. "Who?" Michael turned again. She was gone. No trace, just the empty staircase and shadows dancing on the walls. Eric didn't believe him. "Thought it was stress. You've been studying too much, man," he joked. But Michael knew better. He'd seen her. Again. The next day, he returned to Madame Zhu. After explaining everything, the spirit medium grew quiet. She poured tea-lit incense and asked Michael to sit opposite her. Then she said something he'd never forget. "She's following you." Michael's hands trembled. "She wasn't tied to that hotel. She wasn't tied to Eric's house. She's tied to you." Madame Zhu explained sometimes when a person is marked by accident, by birth, or by circumstance, they attract a particular spirit. One that lingers, watches, waits. Not to harm, but to attach, to be seen. "She wants you to acknowledge her," she said. Michael asked, "What happens if I do?" Madame Zhu didn't answer directly. Instead, she prepared another ritual. This one was different. She gave Michael a small black pouch filled with dried leaves, rice grains, and a silver coin. Carry this for 100 days. Speak no ill of her. Avoid looking into mirrors in the dark. And never sleep directly facing a doorway. Michael obeyed. For 100 days, he followed every rule. He didn't dream of her. He didn't see her. And after that, nothing. She vanished. Maybe it was the pouch. Maybe it was time. Maybe it was mercy. But from then on, Michael's life shifted toward the ordinary. He passed his exams, started university, lived in a dorm, and for years nothing supernatural happened. Until he received a phone call. It was early 2006. Michael was in his third year of university when his cousin Sarah, the one who'd seen Madame Huang on the candle path years earlier, called in a panic. Her younger sister had just passed away from a sudden illness. The funeral had been rushed, the burial done quickly due to a land permit issue. But now her mother had begun seeing things. Shadows in the hallway. A mirror fogging up on its own. Children's toys rearranged at night. Sarah's voice trembled over the phone. "Do you think it's starting again?" Michael didn't hesitate. He replied, "I'll come tomorrow." He packed his bag, dug into his drawer for the old black pouch Madame Ju had given him, and whispered the old prayer he hadn't said in years. Something deep in his chest stirred. He wasn't sure if it was fear or something waking up. Michael arrived in the early afternoon the next day. The sky was overcast, a pale sheet of gray smothering the sun. Sarah's family lived in the outskirts of Suzhou, in a modest two-story home just past a quiet canal. The house was wrapped in silence when Michael walked through the gate. Sarah opened the door before he knocked. Her eyes were red from crying. "Thanks for coming," she whispered. "Come in." Michael entered, removing his shoes. The air smelled faintly of sandalwood incense, though he couldn't see any sticks burning. The living room lights were off. Only natural light filtered in through the curtains. Sarah's mother sat motionless on a low bamboo chair facing the altar. The altar itself was simple, just a framed photo of her younger daughter, flanked by 2 red candles and a dish of fruit. A small bowl of ashes from burned incense sat at the base. Sarah leaned in close. She hasn't eaten since the funeral. Keeps saying she hears her daughter's voice. Michael approached carefully. "Hello, Auntie," he said gently. The old woman didn't respond. Her eyes were fixed on the photo. Then she spoke low and shaky. "She calls me. Every night." From the mirror, Michael looked toward the hallway mirror, an old wooden frame, full length, leaning slightly against the wall across the room. "She says she's cold," the woman continued. "Says she didn't want that land. It's damp. She says she can't breathe." Michael felt the temperature shift. The room got colder. Sarah hugged herself. "I didn't know what else to do. The graveyard we used, it's near the riverbank. The day we buried her, the ground was already soggy. We thought it didn't matter." Michael's breath fogged slightly. He stepped toward the mirror and stopped. There were fingerprints, small smeared handprints on the inside of the glass. He turned to Sarah. "How long have these been here?" She shook her head. "We clean that mirror every morning." Michael's pulse quickened. "She's trapped," he said. Sarah gasped. He turned back to the mirror, staring into its surface. His reflection looked back at him, slightly delayed. The lighting in the room felt off, flickering around the edges. Then it happened. In the corner of the mirror, just behind his reflection's left shoulder, something moved. A figure. A girl no older than 10, hair slicked to her cheeks as if wet. her white clothes clinging to her body. She looked up at him, mouth open. No sound, just anguish. Michael took a step back. The reflection didn't move with him. It stayed frozen eyes locked on the little girl in the background. Sarah screamed. The mirror cracked just once, thin like a spider web, right over the girl's face. Then the light bulb above flickered and blew out with a pop. Darkness. Michael reached into his pocket, pulled out the pouch from Madame Jew, and clutched it in both hands. He began chanting not loudly, not like in the temples, but softly, repeating the phrases Madame Jew had taught him years ago. It was a prayer for release, for peace, for passage. Sarah lit a candle from the altar and held it beside him. The mirror pulsed. A low hum filled the room, vibrating through the floorboards, through their bones. Then quiet. Michael opened his eyes. The mirror was whole again. The fingerprints were gone. And so was the girl. Sarah sobbed into her hands. "Is she gone?" Michael nodded, though his voice shook. "For now." He turned to the altar. "We need to move her," he said. "Where?" Sarah asked. "Someplace dry, high ground. Somewhere she can rest." They found a new burial site that week, on a sloping hill overlooking a field of plum blossoms. A place that felt open, peaceful. They held a second ceremony. Simple, honest. And after the house felt different, brighter, warmer, Sarah's mother began eating again. The mirror never fogged without reason, and Michael once again returned to his quiet life. But he knew something now, something he hadn't understood before. Some spirits don't want revenge. They want to be remembered, properly, treated with dignity, laid to rest with care. In the stories he had witnessed, the horror came not from malice, but from neglect. The world of the dead cries out when the world of the living forgets. And Michael, he never forgot. He began keeping journals, writing down every strange encounter, every ritual, every face he remembered. One day he told himself he would share them. Maybe to warn others, maybe to help. Or maybe, just maybe, to honor those who still wandered the edges of this world. Years passed. Michael grew older, moved cities, built a modest life far from the bustle of Shanghai and Suzhou. He worked in logistics, a quiet job with late hours and early mornings. Perfect for someone who had grown used to living between dusk and dawn. But no matter how far he moved, the past never really left. It waited. It watched. And sometimes it returned. This last incident took place in 2010. Michael was 25 and had been renting a small apartment near a hospital in Hangzhou. He liked the area close to the markets, quiet at night, and most importantly, no spiritual residue. The building was modern, reinforced concrete, bright hallways, clean elevators. Or so he thought. That year, Michael's routine involved returning home around 8:30 p.m., cooking something simple, and watching old nature documentaries to fall asleep. On weekdays, he rarely socialized. Peace, above all, was his priority. One Thursday night, everything changed. He had just finished washing his dishes when the power went out. All at once, click the lights, shut off the fan, stilled, the fridge hummed to silence. Michael wasn't alarmed at first. Power cuts happened. But when he looked outside his window, he saw something odd. Every other unit in the building still had power. Bright. Normal. Only his apartment was dark. His stomach dropped. He lit a candle from the emergency drawer and stood still, listening. The flame flickered slightly, though there was no draft. Then came the knock. A soft tap, 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 not on the door, but on the living room window. His window faced a narrow gap between buildings, no ledge, no way up. He lived on the 6th floor. And yet, The knock came again. Tap, tap. Michael didn't move, just watched the curtain. The third time the knock was accompanied by a sound. A woman's voice. Faint, muffled, crying. Michael stepped closer, pulled the curtain aside just enough to peer through. Nothing. Just the night sky and the faint outlines of the building opposite. Then he turned, and there she was, inside the room. A woman, late 20s, hair plastered to her cheeks. A hospital bracelet still dangling from one wrist. Her gown was soaked, and her belly was swollen, pregnant. She stood in the corner near the sofa, weeping silently, her body trembling as if with cold. Michael froze. His thoughts spiraled. He didn't know her. He hadn't brought anything home. No recent offerings, no temple visits, no open portals. She shouldn't be here, but she was. Then came the whisper. Not from her mouth, but from somewhere else. From the air. He's gone. They took him. I couldn't save him. The woman dropped to her knees. Michael stepped back, and for the first time he noticed she was barefoot. But her feet left wet footprints on the floor. He watched as one foot pressed forward, leaving behind a puddle, another, and another. A trail of water moving from the window to the center of the room. Michael's instincts kicked in. He fumbled for the pouch he still kept inside his drawer. Pulled it out, clutched it tight. Then, almost instinctively, he began chanting softly. The same prayer Madame Jew had taught him nearly a decade ago. The woman looked up. Her eyes were bottomless, not hateful, just lost. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. Then, as if a great wind had swept through the candle, extinguished. Darkness. A second later, the power came back on. Lights flickered. Fridge hummed. Fan whirred. But she was gone. Only the wet footprints remained trailing across the wooden floor. Michael stood in silence for a long time, breath uneven. Later that night, he couldn't sleep. He opened his laptop and began searching online forums, hospital records, anything. Finally, he found something. 2 months earlier, a young woman had died during childbirth at the very hospital across the street. Complications. The baby didn't survive. She had been 6 months along unmarried. Her parents didn't claim the body. Buried in a mass plot, unblessed, unnamed. Michael stared at the screen. Something inside him ached. The next day, he went to the temple near West Lake. He bought 2 joss papers, one for the mother, one for the child. He wrote nameless mother and unnamed son in red ink, folded them carefully, and burned them under a banyan tree. As the papers turned to ash and drifted into the wind, he whispered, "You were seen." From that night on, she never returned, but her footprints stayed etched in memory. And Michael kept searching, not for ghosts, but for the forgotten, the overlooked, the ones who never got a chance to say goodbye. Not long after that incident, Michael began writing in earnest. What started as scattered notes turned into full-pages stories, layered with fear, grief, and mystery. He didn't consider himself a writer, but he understood one thing: memory had power. And if these spirits reached out because they had been abandoned, maybe his stories could bring them back into the light, even just for a moment. By late 2011, Michael had amassed over 30 entries in his growing notebook, each labeled by date, location, and a simple title like "The Mirror Girl Knocking Laughter" or "The Woman in Wet Footprints." But one entry remained unwritten for years, one that he couldn't bring himself to face. It happened during his cousin Grace's wedding. Grace? The same cousin who had once seen Uncle William's ghost as a child, was now 27 and getting married to a businessman from Tianjin. The wedding was held at a luxury hotel in Ningbo, and the entire extended family was invited. Michael didn't want to go. He had avoided family gatherings for years, ever since realizing how often spirits seem to follow him, and sometimes find others through him. But Grace called him personally. "It won't be the same without you," she said. So he went. The hotel was extravagant. Chandeliers in the lobby, fresh orchids on every table, silk banners in red and gold. Michael shared a room with his older brother, now a father of two, who joked, "Maybe if a ghost shows up this time, it'll just hand us a red envelope." Everything went smoothly until the second night. After the banquet, Michael couldn't sleep. His brother was snoring lightly. The hotel room was dim, with only the faint blue glow of the hallway nightlight bleeding under the door. Then Michael heard it. Footsteps. Light. Bare. Moving slowly across the carpet outside. He sat up, heartbeat rising. Then a whisper. Michael. His name. Spoken directly. Right outside the door. He stood, walked silently to the peephole, and looked. No one. Just the hallway. But the temperature dropped. He saw his breath fog the peephole glass. And then tap, tap, tap on the window behind him. He turned too fast, knocking over the bedside lamp. Its bulb shattered on the carpet. He reached the window. Outside was the hotel garden, dimly lit sculpted hedges, lotus pond glinting in the moonlight. And standing there by the edge of the pond was a woman. In white, again. Her face turned upward toward his window. But there was something wrong with her body. Her arms hung at strange angles too long. Her neck tilted as if it had been bent forcefully. And in her hands she held a red bridal veil. Torn, fluttering in the wind. Michael's legs buckled. He dropped to the floor. His brother stirred. "What's going on?" Michael crawled to the desk drawer, pulled out the talisman pouch, and whispered the chants under his breath. He didn't dare look again. In the morning, the hotel lobby was in chaos. One of the guests, a young woman from the groom's side, had gone missing. She had never returned to her room after the banquet. They found her at noon, in the pond. Drowned, still wearing her wedding banquet dress. But her veil was missing. Michael said nothing. At the funeral, he asked around. No one knew much about her. She was a friend of a cousin, not well known. Young, quiet. She had been standing alone by the pond after midnight, according to the CCTV. But the recording had a glitch, exactly 7 seconds of static right before she vanished. Michael made a silent offering by the water's edge. 3 incense sticks, a white lotus, and a triangle of joss paper. He burned the paper slowly, whispering, "I see you. I remember." No visions followed, no voices, no wind, just the flicker of flame. That was enough. Later that year, Michael returned to Madame Zhu. He was older now, calmer, more in control of the energy he carried. He showed her his notebook. She flipped through the pages, nodded thoughtfully, and then looked up. "You've become a keeper," she said. Michael blinked. "A what?" "A keeper of stories. You walk between 2 worlds, not because you choose to, but because you can." He didn't know how to respond. She handed him a small wooden box. "For when the notebook is full," she said. Inside was a fresh stack of yellow talisman paper, a red brush, and a folded note. The note simply said, "Some doors must remain open so others may close." Michael never forgot that. And every time a story came to him through a friend, a stranger, or his own path, he wrote it down. Not to chase the dead, but to remember the living. In 2012, Michael took a long overdue vacation. Not to escape the spirits, but to escape everything else. He chose Dali, a lakeside town in Yunnan province, known for its calm energy mountain air. and ancient Bai architecture. He booked a modest guest house near Air Lake, planning to spend a week drinking tea hiking, and pretending the supernatural didn't exist. For 3 days it worked. No whispers, no shadows, just him, a mountain breeze, and silence. Then on the 4th day he met May. She was the guest house owner's niece, an artist visiting from Chengdu. They shared a table during breakfast, exchanged a few quiet words about the mist hanging over the lake, and ended up walking together into town. She was unlike anyone Michael had known. Warm, curious, with a laugh that echoed through the alleyways like wind chimes. She didn't ask too many questions about his past. He didn't tell her. They spent 4 days together, and on the last evening as the sun dropped behind the mountains, May turned to him and asked, "Have you ever seen something you weren't supposed to?" Michael paused. She smiled, misreading his hesitation. "I mean something beautiful. So strange it almost felt holy." Michael exhaled slowly. "I think so." He didn't elaborate. That night they sat by the lake shore, skipping stones and talking about nothing. And for once, just once, Michael allowed himself to believe the world was just a quiet, normal place. But when he returned to the guest house alone, the peace unraveled. He found the door to his room open, his belongings undisturbed, except for one thing: his notebook. It sat open on the bed. The page turned to a blank sheet, and written across it in jagged black ink was a single line: "She is not May." Michael's blood froze. He ran back to the shoreline, but May was gone. He checked the guest house. No one had seen her leave. No one even knew she existed. He confronted the owner, confused and panicked. The owner frowned. "My niece, I don't have one." Michael's voice cracked. "The girl I've been with. May, she said she's from Chengdu. She paints." The owner looked shaken. "No young women have checked in all week." Michael stumbled out, half convinced he was losing his mind. But then he remembered something. Her hands. When they walked side by side, she had always kept her left hand closed, gloved even on warm afternoons. He hadn't thought much of it, but now he did. He searched his memory. The moment they shared mooncakes on the dock. She handed him one with her right hand. Her left stayed curled, lifeless. The memory clicked. The chill in her touch, the way dogs barked when she passed, how shadows bent toward her when she moved. She hadn't been real, but she wasn't evil. She had laughed, shared stories, looked at him like no one had in years. Michael returned to the guest house, took out his pouch, and burned an offering beneath the full moon, not to banish but to thank. "Whatever you were," he whispered, "you gave me something real, even if it wasn't meant to last." The next morning, a package arrived at the guest house addressed to him. No sender, no postmark. Inside was a painting. Brushstrokes soft and fluid, an image of a man sitting by Air Lake, next to a woman with a hidden hand, and in the corner the signature May. Michael held the painting to his chest. Later, he walked to the town market and bought a small wooden frame. He hung the painting beside his bed. He never saw her again. But when he thought of Dali, of quiet mornings, and the light touch of wind on water, he remembered her. And sometimes, when he sat alone by a window, he swore he heard her voice on the wind. Soft, laughing, alive. By 2013, Michael had grown used to his double life, ordinary by day. A quiet observer of the unseen by night. He rarely spoke about the things he'd witnessed, not because he feared disbelief, but because he'd learned something more unsettling some people do believe, and that belief has a way of drawing things closer, Still, he never stopped collecting stories. Sometimes they came from strangers on trains, sometimes from overheard conversations at tea stalls, and sometimes from whispers in dreams. This next story came from the latter. Michael had been staying in Nanjing for work. A short-term logistics audit had brought him to a hotel near the old city walls. The area was steeped in history, and beneath that history, layers of pain. He hadn't planned to write anything new that week, but on the second night he dreamed of a boy. Young, 8 or 9, wearing a threadbare school uniform and mismatched socks. The boy stood at the foot of Michael's hotel bed, eyes wide with confusion. He didn't speak, just pointed at the window. Michael awoke with a start. The room was dark, quiet, but the window was open. He distinctly remembered closing it before bed. He rose slowly, heart thudding, crossed the room, peered outside. Nothing but the silhouette of the ancient city wall under moonlight. He shut the window, locked it, tried to forget. The next night the boy returned. Same place, same posture. But this time he spoke. He didn't come back. Michael's skin crawled. Who, he asked in the dream. The boy looked down. Teacher. Then he pointed at the window again. Michael followed. This time when he looked out in the dream, he saw something. A man, face down on the stone walkway. Blood pooled around his head, papers scattered in the wind. Michael woke in sweat. He didn't know why it affected him so much. Dreams came and went, but this one felt anchored, like it wanted to be remembered. The next morning, Michael visited the old wall on foot. There, near a small alley behind the gate tower, was a plaque he had never noticed before. Worn characters etched into stone. To Teacher Zhang, who protected his students during the bombing of 1937. May he rest in peace. Michael stood frozen. He had not read about this before. The boy's words returned to him. He didn't come back. The weight of history pressed down on him. So many souls lost, so many stories buried, and some still wandering. That night, Michael prepared a quiet ritual. 3 sticks of incense, a small candle, and a folded letter he wrote by hand, addressed simply to the boy who remembers. He burned the letter beneath the hotel window, and before the flame consumed the last corner of paper, a breeze rushed through the room, cool and deliberate. The candle flickered, then steadied. And that night the boy did not return. But Michael did not sleep easily. He felt something had passed through him. Not darkness, not even grief. Just the weight of remembrance. Sometimes, spirits cling not out of anger or fear, but because they are the only ones left who remember. And if they forget, who else will carry their story? Michael added the dream to his notebook. Titled it, The Boy by the Wall. He didn't know his name, but he remembered his socks. One blue, one red, like tiny flags waving in a war that no child should ever have known. Michael often wondered what tied these souls to him. He wasn't a priest. He never trained in the rituals beyond what Madame Ju had passed on. He didn't meddle in the dead's business out of vanity or bravery. He simply listened. And sometimes that was all the dead wanted. In the winter of 2014, a different kind of story found him. One not born of ghostly visions, but of quiet grief and an old superstition. It began with a phone call from an old college friend, Daniel Lin. Daniel sounded nervous. Michael, I think something's wrong with my son. The boy Ethan had just turned 5. He hasn't been himself, Daniel said. He talks to the walls, refuses to sleep in his room. Says there's someone else in his bed. Michael's first instinct was to ask whether they'd recently moved. They had. A rental home in the suburbs of Wuxi, newly renovated. Cheap, almost too cheap. Michael didn't need to hear more. He arrived that weekend. The house was crisp and modern. Pale hardwood floors, white cabinets, an overly cheerful welcome mat at the front door. Ethan was quiet. Too quiet for a 5-year-old. He clutched a small plush rabbit with one arm and held Michael's hand with the other. They toured the house together. The moment they stepped into Ethan's room, the air changed. Slightly colder. Still. The boy whispered, "She doesn't like the lights on." Michael looked at the ceiling. The bulb had burned out. Daniel said it kept happening. 5 new bulbs in a week. Michael asked Ethan to show him where the girl stayed. The child pointed to the closet. But it wasn't the closet that caught Michael's eye. It was the floor beneath it. There in the wood grain, a faint discoloration. A square once sealed, now carelessly repainted. He looked closer. It was a crawl space. They pried it open. Inside was dust-rotted insulation and a pair of tiny shoes. White, patent leather. The sort worn during school ceremonies. And a ribbon pink and frayed still tied around a clump of black hair. Daniel turned pale. Michael didn't speak. They called the authorities the next morning. Forensics arrived. A full investigation was launched. The news broke a week later. The house had once belonged to a school teacher in the early 1990s. She had taken in her niece after a family accident. The girl went missing within the year. Police at the time suspected she had run away. No one looked further. The teacher died in a car crash 5 years later. The house changed owners 3 times. But no one stayed long. Michael quietly returned to the house after the authorities left. He sat in Ethan's room, placed the small pouch beside the plush rabbit, and lit a stick of incense on the windowsill. He didn't say much, just looked into the closet and whispered, "You can go now. You're found." A breeze passed through, and for the first time since his arrival, the bulb overhead flickered and stayed on. Ethan never saw the girl again. Daniel sold the house 2 months later. Michael never added that story to the notebook. Some stories weren't his to keep. They belonged to a child, to a father, to a lost girl who had waited in silence for far too long. Instead, he folded the ribbon, wrapped it in red cloth, and buried it beneath a plum tree on the edge of the Temple Hill. No markings, no inscription. Just a promise, you're no longer forgotten. And when the first blossoms bloomed that spring, Michael stood beneath the tree and listened. No cries, no whispers, only wind. And in that silence, peace. As the years passed, Michael's notebook grew heavy, not with pages, but with weight. The weight of eyes that had watched him from mirrors and hallways. The weight of names no longer spoken. Of grief too old for tears, and sorrow too gentle for fear. He no longer chased the unknown. He welcomed it, not with arrogance, but with care. Each encounter became a bridge between what once was and what still lingered. In his quiet apartment, a small shelf stood by the window. On it sat the painting from Dali, a red pouch of unused talismans, a white candle that never seemed to burn down, and a box of joss paper always ready. Not everything in his stories was horrifying. Some moments were sacred, a whisper of gratitude, a final smile, a dream where no one was alone. He had come to understand horror isn't always in the blood and shadows. Sometimes it's in the forgetting, the silence, the unopened door. And sometimes peace isn't silence, it's memory. Michael kept writing. Not for fame, not for answers, but because someone had to. And on nights when the wind rose just right, and the lights in the hallway flickered for no reason at all, he'd sit at his desk, light the candle and whisper, "I see you, I remember." And the darkness would settle not with menace, but with trust. because someone still cared. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The horror stories of the East never truly end.
That was their story. Maybe you believe it, maybe you don't. But tonight, when the lights go out, just remember, not every silence means you're alone. New true horror stories every week. Subscribe if you haven't already. And if you have a story of your own, send it to us. You're not the only one who's seen things.